is particularly important in this year because this year marks a number of very critical anniversaries. Tomorrow, the 2nd of March, would be exactly 40 years since 25,000 of us marched in London, 8 miles from Deptford to the Houses of Parliament to protest the killings of 13 young Black people at a house in 439 Deptford Road in New Cross. That fire took place against the background of relentless neo-fascist activity in the area. An activity which was paralleled very much by the police persecution of young Black people. Some 4 years ago, Stafford Scott, a member of the monitoring group in London, wrote a very important pamphlet where he talked about the war on drugs being a war on working class Black youth. And there's no question that that remains the case even now. And not only in relation to stop and search, but in relation to how those young people are themselves groomed for such activities, and the manner in which schools trample upon their rights as young people, exclude them in disproportionate numbers, and shunt them into alternative provision, pupil referral units, etc. And I mean, basically, those provision are what I call the antechamber to young offender institutions. That's the purpose they serve. So I'm inviting us to look at all of that in the round. The fact that Amnesty itself criticized the gang matrix that the Metropolitan Police introduced, which saw 4,000 young people young Black people put on that gang matrix, and the details shared with other organizations, particularly schools, leading to even more exclusion of them on a permanent basis. And that came on the back of the government encouraging schools to have zero tolerance policies towards Black young people after the disturbances, the civil uprisings in Tottenham as a result of the killing of Mark Duggan. The 2nd of March, 1981, and the 25,000 of us on the streets there had everything to do with the way in which the police had been policing London, the fact that the internal terrorism of these far-right extremist groups was never considered as such, and they received very little attention from the police. In fact, the police guarded them as they terrorized our communities in their marches up and down the place, in London, in Rotherham, in Sheffield, and elsewhere. Which is why when I was invited to deliver a message in Manchester Cathedral of all places in 2018 to mark 70 years of Windrush, I had this to say. The reality is, my friends, that the Conservative Party under David Cameron and Theresa May courted UKIP and had a shotgun marriage of convenience. UKIP impregnated the Conservative government. Brexit is their offspring, and the likes of Tommy Robinson, the English Defence League, and National Action appointed themselves wet nurses. But none of that is surprising, for ever since the 1965 Race Relations Act, the first legislation in the UK to tackle racial discrimination, and a direct result of the work of the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination, ever since that act, the British state positioned itself on a spectrum with At one end, the government ostensibly espousing liberal notions of the value and richness of diversity, while conflating immigration and race and racializing immigration, and passing racist immigration legislation with every new iteration. And then at the other end of that same spectrum, the far right harassing Black people, indulging in Paki bashing and nigger hunting, and in racist murders, agitating to keep Britain white, with the political parties oscillating between the center and the far right. And if you want any evidence of that, just listen to the pronouncements recently of Sadiq Javid, that incredible person, Priti Patel, Pretty Nasty Patel, and Kemi Badenoch, condemning the Black Lives Matter movement in the vilest of terms, while at the same time presiding over the death of elderly people who they say rescued and built the National Health Service and all of that stuff through their hostile environment policies. We're in a pretty dangerous moment in the country, frankly, because there's a coalition, an undeclared coalition, more and more, between the conservative far right and the alt-right and far right in the country. And people simply tend to just take it as normal. So critical race theory is under attack, Black Lives Matter is under attack, freedom of expression is under attack, and you have people like Gavin Williamson and Priti Patel dragging us down into a morass of injustice, denial of human rights, and massive confusion. And that is why what we will do on the 20th of March is so very, very important. And that is why we have to remember the significance of 25,000 people, mainly young, mainly Black, with progressive whites joining us to declare that the state and the state of Britain has a responsibility towards all of those young people, because we're not talking anymore of immigrants, colored or otherwise. And we're not talking about BAME. We're talking about young Black Britishers who have every right to determine the future of this country as anybody else. And so this notion of them being somehow on the margins, othered, and not having the same right to protest, to determine the direction of the country as everybody else, that is what I think we have to confront. And we do that by resisting this resurgence of neo-fascism in the society.